Part 2 of this National Naval Aviation Museum's virtual tour series features World War II aircraft that are displayed in the museum. Enjoy viewing photos and videos while listening to information about these historic aircraft. If you find this video entertaining and informative, please click the like button to help others find it. Thank you, and enjoy your tour. The Stearman M2S was the United States' foremost primary training aircraft during World War II. It was a conventional biplane of rugged construction with a large fixed tailwheel undercarriage and accommodations for the student and instructor in open cockpits in tandem. Though the company christened the trainer with the name Cadet, those who flew and maintained it universally called it the Stearman. It was initially designed as an Army Air Corps trainer, but it served extensively in the Navy that accepted the first 4,318 of them in the late 30s. By World War II, both Army and Navy operated standardized versions of the aircraft with interchangeable parts, unique in an era where joint operations were far from standard. The museum's Cadet logged 2 flights with Aviation Cadet George H.W. Bush at the controls at Naval Air Station Minneapolis. The Naval Aircraft Factory's N3N served as a primary trainer, as it was extremely rugged and easy to maintain. All who flew the aircraft knew it as the Yellow Peril, a nickname prompted by its paint scheme and the fact that it was flown predominantly by inexperienced student pilots. Where it became perilous was in taxiing due to poor cockpit visibility combined with inadequate brakes and an ineffective rudder that led to more than a few ground loops. It served as a primary trainer from the late 30s to the mid-40s as both a conventional wheeled plane and as a float plane. Float-configured N3Ns were later used for midshipman indoctrination flights at the U.S. Naval Academy until their retirement in 1961, making it the last biplane used in military service. The N3N was unique in that it was an aircraft designed and manufactured by an aviation firm wholly owned and operated by the U.S. government as opposed to private industry. The Ryan Aeronautical Company specialized in trainers, and their ST trainer attracted the interest of the Army Air Corps and Navy. In an era in which primary trainers were almost exclusively biplane designs, the airplane was a low-wing monoplane. In addition, it featured a metal fuselage that contrasted with the fabric-covered fuselages of the N3N or N2S primary trainers. The first 100 ST-3s ordered by the Navy were designated NR-1s and entered service in 1941. In naval service, NR-1s operated at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Florida and Memphis, Tennessee, as well as Auxiliary Air Station Cecil Field, Florida, until 1944. This airplane was built in 1941 and likely flew with the Army Air Forces as a PT-22 primary trainer, was acquired by the National Naval Aviation Museum in 1982, and is painted in the markings of a Navy NR-1 recruit primary trainer. The Curtiss-Wright Corporation CW-22N was demonstrated to the Navy, resulting in it ordering 150 in 1940. Further orders brought the total to 305 aircraft, which were designated SNC-1 Falcons. They helped meet the war-driven need for aviator training when transitioning from biplanes to monoplane aircraft. They were used as combat trainers, plus as reconnaissance and general-purpose military aircraft until 1944. This Falcon was accepted by the Navy in 1942 and served as a trainer and utility aircraft. The Vultee SNV was used as an intermediate trainer during World War II. It introduced Naval and Marine Corps student pilots to a heavier, higher-performing aircraft that incorporated two-way radio communications, manually operated flaps, and a variable pitch two-blade propeller, a major step in preparing student pilots to advance to more complicated, higher-performance aircraft. It served the second, basic training portion of the three-step training process. This airplane was built in 1941 and flew with the Army Air Force as a BT-13A and is displayed in the markings of an SNV-1. More than 300,000 American and Allied student pilots earned their wings in the North American SNJ Texan and its variants. It was so important to the Allied World War II effort that it was dubbed the pilot maker. They were also used for gunnery training and instrument flying. After the war, every aviation midshipman flew the SNJ through basic flight training, culminating with 6 carrier landings aboard a small-deck aircraft carrier. This SNJ 5-seat Texan spent most of its service life at Naval Air Station Pensacola and surrounding airfields, but it also flew as a utility aircraft aboard the aircraft carrier Kearsarge. Several Douglas A-26 Invaders were converted to JD-1s for the Navy in 1945. They were used by various utility squadrons to tow targets and perform similar training missions. Some were later redesignated JD-1Ds and equipped to control drones. In 1939, the Navy purchased 10 Beech D-17s, designating them GB-1 Travelers. Eventually, 360 served as executive transports, ferrying pilots to aircraft factories who would then deliver the new airplanes to the fleet. Note that it had a negative wing stagger, where the lower wing was farther forward than the upper wing. This Traveler is painted in the markings of an aircraft assigned to the Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida. The Cessna AT-17 Bobcat served in many roles with the Army Air Corps and Navy during World War II. One Navy version was the JRC that transported ferry pilots to and from their home bases during the war. This JRC-1 is painted in the markings of a World War II-era Navy instrument trainer. The Navy received 568 Douglas DC-3s and designated them R-4D Skytrains. Many served in the Naval Air Transport Service created during World War II. Other roles included carrying Marine Corps paratroopers, dropping flares in support of close air support missions in Korea, and supporting expeditions to the Antarctic. Que Sera Sera was the name given to the R-4D-5L that made the first landing at the South Pole on October 31, 1956. The Goose was the first monoplane and first twin-engine aircraft produced by Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard designated the aircraft JRF. Its configuration made it a natural transport and utility aircraft that was used for target towing, aerial photography, medical evacuation, search and rescue, and anti-submarine warfare. This Goose is a civilian version of the aircraft that is displayed as a Coast Guard JRF-3, the first version of the Goose equipped with autopilot and de-icing boots on the wings for operations in the Arctic. The J4F Widgeon was built as a smaller, less expensive alternative to the G21 Goose for use in the civilian market. In Navy and Coast Guard operations, the airplane flew utility, search and rescue, and anti-submarine missions. The museum's aircraft was procured by the Coast Guard and flew anti-submarine patrols over the Gulf of Mexico during World War II, where it attacked and damaged the German submarine U-171 on August 1, 1942. The Grumman J2F Duck served with all services during World War II. It performed many roles including transport, patrol, anti-submarine, and search and rescue missions. One J2F was the last aircraft to leave Bataan before it surrendered to Japan in 1942. This duck was built by Columbia Aircraft, but contrary to standard designating practices, retained the Grumman J2F designation. The consolidated PBY Catalina served with every branch of the United States Armed Forces and in the services of many other nations. They proved ideal in long-range reconnaissance, night anti-shipping, and air-sea rescue. They were also used in anti-submarine warfare, patrol bombing, convoy escort, and cargo transport in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters of World War II. They destroyed 40 U-boats, but not without losses of their own. This PBY-5 is the only pure seaplane variant in existence and is on loan from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Following the first flight of the PBY, the Navy sought even larger, better-performing aircraft for use as patrol bombers. The result was the consolidated PB-2Y Coronado, a large flying boat patrol bomber that was used by the U.S. Navy during World War II in bombing, anti-submarine, and transport roles. Compared to other Navy flying boats, the PB-2Y frontline service was limited, although Coronados participated in bombing missions against Japanese-held Wake Atoll and aerial mining operations in the air campaign against the Japanese naval base at Truk Atoll. This Coronado is the last known surviving example and served as a plush flag transport, carrying the staff of Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to Tokyo to attend Japanese surrender ceremonies aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. The Vought-Sikorsky OS-2U Kingfisher was the U.S. Navy's primary ship-based scout and observation aircraft during World War II. They performed a variety of roles in the Pacific, spotting naval gunfire, observation, sub-hunting, rescue, and more. Hundreds of Allied airmen owe their lives to the Kingfisher crews who rescued them during World War II. They were launched by ship's catapults, then they were recovered using a sea sled towed just below the surface. The aircraft would land in the wake, taxi to the sled, and engage it with small hooks on the bottom of the float before being craned aboard. This Kingfisher was a Lend-Lease aircraft that was operated by the Navy of Uruguay until 1958. The U.S. Navy procured the Schweitzer LNS-1 to train glider pilots to execute airborne assaults. Its glide ratio and performance were very different from the heavier assault gliders that had much higher sink rates. By 1943, the efficacy of glider operations in naval aviation had come under question, and the program was abandoned. Sikorsky's HNS Hoverfly was naval aviation's first helicopter and was used extensively by Coast Guard aviators as they spearheaded adoption of this new aircraft type. It was Coast Guard officers who first recognized the advantages of the helicopter for search and rescue and anti-submarine warfare roles. When first delivered in late 1943, its intended use was pilot training. Yet it soon assumed operational search and development roles, participating in actual life-saving operations, and served as the platform for developing hoist equipment for search and rescue. In January 1944, an HNS-1 also made flights from the deck of the British freighter, proving the utility of the helicopter in operations at sea. Development of the HNS-1 continued through World War II in both the Pacific and Atlantic operating areas, with versions of the Hoverfly also used by Great Britain and the U.S. Army Air Force, the latter employing one in rescue under combat conditions in the China-Burma-India theater. Interstate Aircraft's TDR-1 was built around RCA's early television and was the world's first legitimate cruise missile. It could be piloted to ferry the aircraft to a destination and could be radio-controlled for use as a drone. Carrying a 1,000-pound bomb or torpedo and controlled from a TBM Avenger control aircraft, the TDR saw action in the Pacific in September 1944. During a 2-month period, 50 drones were launched with 31 hits recorded on anti-aircraft sites, bridges, airfields, and grounded ships. By October 1944, the use of the TDR ended and the concept of precision-guided munition deemed of lesser priority in the Pacific due to the U.S. air superiority. Following the Pearl Harbor attack, there was a desire to strike the Japanese mainland, but no carrier-based aircraft had the range to achieve this. The Army Air Corps' B-25 Mitchell medium bomber fit the requirement with its range, bomb load up to 3,000 pounds, and, most importantly, ability to take off in a relatively short distance. On April 18, 1942, 16 B-25s launched from the Hornet, bombing industrial targets on the mainland, then setting off for China, with most bailing out or crash landing. Of the 80 Doolittle Raiders, 3 were killed, 7 were captured, with 4 dying in captivity. The material damage inflicted was minor, but the psychological impact on the Japanese was huge. This aircraft is painted in the markings of the airplane flown by Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle on the raid from the carrier Hornet. Brewster's SB-2A Buccaneer was designed as a dive bomber but never saw combat. It was armed with 2 50 caliber machine guns in the cowling, 2 30 caliber machine guns in the wings, 2 dorsal 30 caliber machine guns, and could carry a 1,000-pound internal bomb load. It lacked ruggedness and incurred many stress problems that made it unreliable. Some Buccaneers flew as target tugs or were used as ground maintenance trainers. The Marine Corps, needing an aircraft for night fighter training, took some of the SBAs and assigned them to 2 squadrons at Naval Station Vero Beach, Florida. Some of the latter SB-2As were scrapped without entering service. Many historians consider the Buccaneer to be among the worst World War II aircraft. The Vought Sikorsky SB-2U Vindicator was the Navy's first monoplane scout bomber. It was a step forward in the 1930s, but it was inferior to other fighting machines in its class by the time of World War II. It was armed with 1 fixed forward-firing and 1 flexible 50 caliber machine guns. Its sole combat role came in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway, nearly 7 years after the aircraft first became operational. Of the 12 Vindicators flown by Marines in the battle, 6 were lost and 5 were severely damaged. This Vindicator was recovered from Lake Michigan in 1990 and is the only one in existence. The Douglas SBD Dauntless is arguably the most important dive bomber ever built. It was the Navy's main carrier-based scout dive bomber from mid-1940 through mid-1944. It was armed with 2 50 caliber machine guns in the nose and 2 30 caliber machine guns in the crew position, and could carry 1 1,600-pound bomb under the fuselage and 2 325-pound bombs under the wings. The Dauntless proved a highly effective dive bomber. Its unique split flap and dive brake set up very steep and accurate diving attacks. The first major Dauntless combat was at the Battle of the Coral Sea, where SBDs and TBD Devastators sank the Japanese light aircraft carrier Soho and damaged the Japanese fleet carrier Sokaku. During the Battle of Midway, SBDs sank 3 Japanese carriers and heavily damaged a 4th that was sunk the following day. This SBD, Bureau number 2106, is the only known surviving aircraft from the Midway battle, and it earlier survived the Pearl Harbor attack. The Grumman TBF Avenger served as the Navy's standard torpedo bomber throughout the war. Avengers were armed with 2 50 caliber fixed machine guns, 1 50 caliber dorsal machine gun, 1 30 caliber ventral machine gun, and could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs or 1 torpedo in an internal bay. At the Midway battle, Avengers attacked the Japanese fleet but were mauled by enemy fighters. 5 were shot down and the surviving aircraft was badly damaged. They survived to become one of the most effective and widely used torpedo bombers of World War II, sharing credit for sinking the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, and were credited for sinking 30 submarines. Increasingly effective enemy anti-aircraft capabilities, combined with the vulnerable attack profile of a slow-flying torpedo bomber, rendered torpedo attacks rare after Midway. Thus, Avengers were used in a variety of other roles, including reconnaissance, anti-submarine, light transport or cargo work, medical evacuations, and close air support. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was a Japanese long-range carrier-based fighter aircraft. It was considered the world's most capable carrier-based fighter when it was introduced early in World War II, combining excellent maneuverability, range, rate of climb, and acceleration. It was armed with two 30 caliber machine guns above the engine, two wing-mounted 20mm cannon, and carried two 60-kilogram, 130-pound bombs under the wings. In early combat, the Zero had an outstanding kill ratio of 12-1, but by mid-1942, Allied pilots met the Zero on generally equal terms, mostly due to a change in Allied tactics. By 1944, the Zero was a largely outdated fighter aircraft. This Zero is a conglomerate of components from wrecked aircraft discovered on an abandoned fighter strip on Balalee Island near Bougainville. The N1K2 Shiden Kai, Violet Lightning Modified, is an example of significant Japanese technological advances during the war. The Allies' code name for it was George, and it was armed with four wing-mounted 20mm cannon. A unique design feature was an automatic flap system used not only for landing, but also aiding in slow-speed air combat maneuvering that, when coupled with other improvements, made it a worthy opponent. In one instance, one George single-handedly attacked 12 F-6F Hellcats, downing 4 and forcing the others to break contact. However, it arrived too late in the war to make a difference. This George is one of 4 surviving examples and served with the 343rd Air Group that was manned by Japanese aces. The German Messerschmitt Me-262 was the first operational jet fighter. Through 1943 and 44, Hitler assigned priority in Me-262 construction and employment to bombing, pushing his fast bomber over the fighter mission, despite the objections from Fighter Command. Finally, in January 1945, Fighter Wing 7 was formed, followed by Lieutenant General Adolf Galland's Hunting Association 44. Though only a squadron size, Galland's unit was comprised of many of the Luftwaffe's top aces. Operational missions began in August 1944, with German pilots claiming the downing of 19 Allied aircraft for the loss of only 6 Me-262s. Despite a short time in combat, the Me-262 had proven superior to all Allied fighters, accounting for 542 Allied aircraft destroyed while losing 100. This aircraft is a two-seat Me-262 B-1A. The Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk was used by most Allied powers during World War II and remained in frontline service until the end of the war. It was known as the War Hawk in the U.S. Army Air Corps, but Tomahawks to many foreign users. It was armed with two 50 caliber cowl-mounted and 4 30 caliber wing-mounted machine guns. It is displayed at the Naval Air Museum to honor those naval aviators who joined Colonel Claire Chennault's American Volunteer Group, better known as the Flying Tigers, who entered the war in December 1941. They disbanded on July 4, 1942, but during this short time, the AVG shot down 299 enemy aircraft and destroyed another 153 on the ground. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat was the Navy and Marine Corps' premier fighter until late 1942. Its armament consisted of 6 50 caliber machine guns and could carry 2 100-pound bombs. The Wildcat was generally outperformed by the Mitsubishi Zero, but held its own partly because, with relatively heavy armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, the airframe could absorb far more damage than its lightweight, unarmored Japanese rival. The F4F-4, not shown, introduced Grumman's unique wing-folding mechanism that virtually doubled the fighter's capacity aboard carriers. This fact made the Wildcat an ideal aircraft for escort and light carrier operations, and that was key when escorting merchant ship convoys, defending them from enemy threats. By war's end, the stubby fighter listed 58 aces among its pilots. This Wildcat is displayed in the markings in which it was originally painted when it flew from the carrier Wasp during the neutrality patrols protecting U.S. shipping in the western Atlantic Ocean in the months before the United States formally entered World War II. The Eastern Aircraft Division of General Motors produced the FM Wildcat under subcontract from Grumman. Boasting a more powerful engine and taller tail than the F4F, the General Motors-built Wildcats primarily operated from escort carriers. Though employed in the close air support role in the Pacific, FM Wildcats faced down enemy surface ships during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, their pilots historically making repeated strafing runs against battleships and heavy cruisers to draw fire away from American escort carriers during the landmark engagement. The FM-2 Wildcat in the South Pacific Island display was transferred to the Pacific Theater in February 1944, eventually serving in an aircraft pool on Espiritu Santo. One of the Navy and Marine Corps' finest fighters, Vought's F-4U Corsair shot down 2,140 Japanese aircraft during World War II. It had a long nose to accommodate the large engine and inverted gull wings and tall landing gear to accommodate its oversized propeller. The cockpit placement resulted in poor visibility during landing approaches, plus they exhibited adverse stall characteristics at slow approach speeds and tended to bounce on landing. These factors delayed introduction to carrier service, leaving it to Marine land-based squadrons early on. It was armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns and could carry 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets or 4,000 pounds of bombs. It was tough, fast, and very maneuverable. Some Japanese pilots regarded it as the most formidable American fighters of World War II, and its naval aviators achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio. Corsairs used bombs and rockets during the final battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They served on aircraft carriers in the latter part of World War II and went on to serve in Korea. Vought's F-4U Corsair was subcontracted for production by other companies, among them Goodyear, whose Corsairs carried the designation FG. By the end of World War II, Goodyear-built Corsairs were flying in over 50 Navy and Marine Corps squadrons. This FG Corsair entered service in June 1945 and flew primarily with the Naval Air Reserves until stricken from the Navy's inventory in 1976. Grumman's F-6F Hellcat was one of the top World War II fighters. It was armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns. Its combat operations began in August 1943 in an attack on Marcus Island by Fighter Squadron 5 aboard the USS Yorktown. They were easy to operate from carriers, yet could outperform the enemy. Pilots loved them. By 1944, the Hellcat was the Navy's standard carrier-based fighter. It accounted for 5,156 enemy aircraft destroyed, 75% of the Navy's air-to-air victories. I hope you enjoyed this tour of World War II-era aircraft that are displayed in the National Naval Aviation Museum. If you did, please click the like button, as doing so helps others find it. Also, if you want to see more of these videos, please subscribe. Thank you.